Imagine trying to build like a modern political science blueprint out of a 1,400-year-old story about giant cosmic goats standing knee-deep in an infinite ocean, physically holding up this massive wooden throne.
I mean, it sounds totally absurd.
Right. It sounds like the opening scene of some epic fantasy novel.
That's right.
But today, we are taking that exact imagery and watching it just completely shatter into one of the most fiercely intellectual, gritty frameworks for geopolitics and human survival that you might ever come across. So welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Today, for you listening at home or on your commute, we are exploring a profoundly different interpretation of Surah Hud, specifically Ayats 7 through 12, relying heavily on the Parwezian lectures. And our mission today is simple. We're looking at these texts not as, ancient, cloudy mysticism.
Right, not just poetry.
Exactly, but as a rigid blueprint for modern resource management and social physics.
And it really is a complete inversion of how we typically approach ancient texts. Because, we're so conditioned to read classical literature, especially religious texts, through this lens of ethereal comfort.
Yeah.
We want it to be detached from the physical world. We want it to be spiritual. But the lectures we're analyzing today, they strip all of that away. They treat the text literally like an engineering manual.
Right, an engineering manual. And to understand just how radical this shift is, we really have to start with that cinematic hook I just mentioned, right? The Arsh-upon-water.
Oh, yeah. The famous imagery.
Which is found right at the beginning of Ayat 7. Now, when I first read the traditional commentaries on this, they paint an incredibly literal picture. Like, they describe a massive physical throne resting on a literal cosmic sea.
Yeah, a giant piece of furniture.
And the lectures we're reviewing point out that over the centuries, all this wild folklore got attached to it, like those giant cosmic goats with massive horns holding up the throne.
Which, is a fascinating piece of mythological history in itself, right?
Oh, totally.
It's heavily influenced by older Near Eastern and biblical traditions that kind of just seeped into the commentaries over the centuries. But the author of these lectures aggressively pivots away from all that.
They just shut it down.
Completely. They pose this very blunt, logical question, which is, how can the architect of the entire universe sit on a piece of furniture?
Right.
The argument here is that interpreting this literally isn't just mythological, it actually degrades the concept of a boundless creator.
But hold on, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Because when the text talks about the universe being created in 6 ayyam, which traditionalists have, always translated as 6 24-hour days, the Parwezian view comes in and says, no, ayyam actually means evolutionary epochs or stages.
Yes.
Isn't that just a convenient way for modern thinkers to retrofit modern astrophysics into ancient texts, just to, make them sound scientifically relevant to us today?
That is the natural skeptical response. Absolutely. It sounds like retrofitting. But the linguistic argument presented in the material pushes back hard against that idea. The author points out a glaring logical flaw in the traditional view.
Okay.
A 24-hour day is entirely dependent on the Earth's rotation relative to the sun, right?
Yeah, basic astronomy.
So how could there be literal 24-hour days before the Earth, the sun, and the solar system were even fully formed?
Yeah, you literally can't have a day without a sun to measure it against.
Exactly. Therefore, they argue, if you look at classical Arabic lexicons, Ayyam doesn't strictly mean a day. It translates to a period of time, a stage, an epoch. The universe wasn't snapped into existence in a, standard work week. It evolved meticulously over 6 distinct, immense stages.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But earlier in the text, there are 2 specific terms mentioned regarding this whole evolutionary process. Mustawda and Mustagarr.
Yes, crucial terms.
What exactly are those? Are we talking about, evolutionary waiting rooms or something?
That is actually a really great way to visualize it. The author breaks down these terms to show the actual mechanics of this evolution. So Mustawda refers to a temporary resting place or a transitional state.
Like a flux state.
Right. Think of a stiller nursery where clouds of gas and dust are gathering, but they haven't ignited into a star yet. It's unstable. Mustagarr, on the other hand, means a stabilized, finalized state.
Oh.
Like when that star finally ignites and establishes a stable orbit. The text is arguing that the universe moved through these temporary stages, these mustawda, evolving and refining, until it reached a stable environment capable of the next massive leap.
And that massive leap, the crucial element that this entire multi-epoch evolution was building toward, is water.
Exactly.
The text we're analyzing really emphasizes that water is the ultimate fundamental resource required for the emergence of biological life, which honestly brings us back to the exoplanet connection.
Yes, the space exploration angle.
Yeah, because when modern astronomers are looking through, say, the James Webb Space Telescope, scanning planets light years away, they aren't looking for gold or oil to see if there's life.
No, they're looking for moisture.
They're looking for water. The Quran explicitly states that all living things were made from water.
And that biological necessity completely redefines the whole Arsh concept we started with.
Okay, how so?
Well, if water is the ultimate life-giving resource, the foundation of all survival, then what is the throne that's resting on it? In classical Arabic, Arsh translates to authority, power, or the crown of a kingdom.
So it's a metaphor for power.
Right. When historians say a monarch took the throne, they don't mean the king just found a really nice chair and sat down.
Ah,
They mean he assumed sovereign control over the state's resources and laws.
So Arsh-on-water isn't this magical deity floating around on a raft. It means the ultimate divine authority over the universe is rooted in the meticulous management, distribution, and control of life-giving resources. That's the highest form of geopolitics. The universe was engineered over epochs, step by step, to produce a stable environment where water could sustain life, all governed by these precise physical laws.
Which brings us to a really critical pivot point in the text.
Go for it.
If the universe took billions of years, moving through all these complex transitional stages, just to set the stage for biological life, then human existence cannot be an accident.
Right.
It is the result of highly optimized engineering. And if we are the product of optimized engineering, what is the metric for our success? Like, how does the system judge whether a human life or an entire human society is functioning correctly?
And that leads us right into the core of Ayat 7, which explicitly states the purpose of this whole setup. The text says the creation of life and death is a test to see who is Asanu Amala.
Yes.
Now, I'll be completely honest with you. Whenever I've seen that phrase in the past, it's always translated simply as good deeds. You know, you give a few dollars to a charity, you help someone cross the street, you think positive thoughts, check the box, you've done a good deed.
And that is the universally accepted casual translation. But it completely reduces the purpose of human existence to this subjective morality. Well, wait, why is that wrong? I mean, isn't having good intentions and doing nice things basically the foundation of any functioning society?
Well, the Parwezian view argues that good intentions are entirely insufficient for survival. Think about the scale of what we just discussed. A universe built on the rigid laws of astrophysics, evolving over epochs.
Right. Massive engineering.
Exactly. In a system that precise human success cannot possibly be judged by fuzzy subjective feelings of niceness, the author analyzes the Arabic root of asanu, which is husn.
Awesome. Okay.
And this word does not mean a casual good deed. It is an aesthetic and an engineering term. It means perfect proportion, exact balance, and what we might call today optimized production.
Optimized production.
Yes. It is about creating a societal structure that is mathematically fair and perfectly balanced. Wow. And the analogy the lecturers use to explain this is fascinating. They use a medical analogy. Let's say you go to a doctor because you are incredibly sick. Your body is suffering from severe acidity.
Okay.
If that doctor just gives you a handful of, I don't know, iron supplements, because iron is generally considered a quote-unquote good thing for the body, what happens?
The patient gets worse.
Right.
Possibly even dies, because the biological system does not care about the doctor's good intentions. The system requires objective balance. To cure the acidity, the doctor must prescribe an alkaline substance.
Right, a specific counterbalance.
But not just any amount. They have to prescribe an exact proportion, down to the milligram, to act as a specific scientific counterbalance to that acidity. If the dosage is wrong, the good deed becomes destructive.
Let me push that even further with an engineering analogy, because this really helped me wrap my head around it. Think about a complex machine, like a commercial jet engine. You can't just take a beautifully crafted, highly expensive wooden propeller from a vintage airplane and shove it into a modern jet engine.
No, you definitely cannot.
The propeller itself might be a good part in isolation. It's well made, it's expensive, someone put a lot of care into it. But if it doesn't fit the precise, optimized balance of the jet engine's ecosystem, it will completely shatter the blades and bring the plane down.
That is exactly the point the author is making about society. An unbalanced society, even one filled with citizens who genuinely believe they are performing good deeds based on their personal, subjective morality, will inevitably collapse if the underlying structure is out of proportion.
It's structural.
Exactly. And this is the stark difference the text draws between Din, which it defines as a systemic, objective, socioeconomic way of life, and mere religion or madhab.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Well, religion often tells you that if you perform a ritual and your heart feels warm, you are successful. Din, in this view, demands that your actions be measured objectively against a standard, just as a structural engineer measures load-bearing walls against gravity.
So, think about the last time you saw a massive philanthropic event on the news. A billionaire giving away a fortune. The immediate societal reaction is, oh, wow, what an incredible good deed.
Right, they get a magazine cover.
Exactly. But if we apply this specific Parwezian framework to it, we have to ask a much harder question. Why do we still have staggering poverty and massive resource imbalances when there is so much charity in the world?
It's a great question.
It's because the system itself is structurally unbalanced. We're basically treating hyperacidity with random vitamins and feeling great about it because the bottle is labeled charity.
And the text is uncompromising on this. It insists that a deed is only Hasan, truly balanced and optimized, if it actively restores structural balance and honors human dignity.
Dignity is key here.
Yes. If a philanthropic act requires the recipient to feel humiliated, or if it just reinforces the power dynamic that keeps the recipient poor in the first place, it is fundamentally not Asanu Amala. It is a failure of the test mentioned in Ayat 7.
So if this concept of Asanu Amala is so incredibly logical, if it's basically just the social equivalent of applied physics and structural engineering, why is it so wildly unpopular?
Well,
Why is there so much resistance throughout all of human history to establishing a structurally balanced society where resources are managed equitably?
that is the exact psychological hurdle addressed in the second half of Ayat 7, and the text provides a really brilliant breakdown of human behavior to explain it.
This is where we get into the psychological barrier, right? The verse describes a scenario where people are presented with the reality of life after death. But the lectures clarify that in this specific socioeconomic context, life after death isn't just about the afterlife.
Right, it's not just heaven and hell.
It's heavily focused on the law of requital, the inescapable law of cause and effect, the idea that every single action has a long-term mathematical consequence. And how do the critics in the text react to this law when it's presented to them?
They dismiss it entirely.
They call it sirun mubin, which translates to manifest sorcery or obvious magic. Why magic? Of all things to call it, why magic?
To understand why they use the accusation of magic, the author divides human existence into two distinct levels of operation. First, there is the animal level of life.
Okay, the animal level.
This is purely biological and reactive. You eat, you drink, you sleep, you pursue immediate gratification, and you hoard resources to ensure your biological survival at the expense of others. It's a complete zero-sum game.
It's pure, unchecked hedonism. It's living entirely for the present moment without any regard for the structural balance of tomorrow.
Right. But then there is the human level of life, which involves operating by higher long-term values, what the text refers to as the attributes of the divine. Things like absolute justice, proportion, foresight, and ensuring the dignity of the wider community.
The optimized production.
Exactly. Now, imagine a society or an elite class that is living extremely comfortably at the animal level. They are exploiting the environment, hoarding wealth, monopolizing the water, the resources.
Right.
Suddenly, someone comes along and presents them with the law of requital. They present data showing that these unbalanced actions have inescapable mathematical consequences that will eventually destroy the society.
Wow.
This creates massive cognitive dissonance.
Because if they accept that cause and effect is an unbending physical law, it means they are the villains of their own story.
Yes.
It means they have to take responsibility. They would have to actually give up their hoarded wealth and change their comfortable exploitative lifestyles. And nobody wants to do that voluntarily.
So, what is their defense mechanism? How do they protect their fragile, comfortable worldview without admitting they are wrong? They label the law of requital as Sirun Mubin. They call it magic.
It's a coping mechanism.
By rejecting reason and labeling objective data as a superstitious trick, they build an impenetrable psychological barrier. They're essentially saying, we refuse to believe that our current actions will destroy our future. Your warnings are just an illusion, a magic trick designed to steal our power.
I mean, look at our modern world. This is not ancient history. This is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
When people today are presented with incredibly complex, hard data, let's say climate scientists, showing the long-term mathematical consequences of environmental resource mismanagement.
Sure.
Or economists showing that severe wealth inequality will inevitably lead to market collapse.
Yeah.
How do the people benefiting from that imbalance react? Do they say, well, the social physics are off, let's re-optimize?
Absolutely not.
No. They call the data a hoax. They call it a conspiracy. They dismiss it as modern witchcraft. They reject reason entirely to avoid taking personal responsibility for the imbalances they profit from.
It is a universal social pathology. The desire to protect short-term, animal-level comfort at the expense of long-term survival is the root of societal decay. And the source text is incredibly stark about this.
How so?
It states that living purely at this animal level while ignoring the higher balanced values is actually a state of psychological death. The author calls it an unlived life.
An unlived life.
Wow. You might have a heartbeat, you might be breathing, but if your existence does not contribute to the optimized balance of humanity, you are biologically alive but fundamentally dead in the evolutionary sense.
But wait, if I'm one of these critics, I'm going to look at the world and point out a very obvious flaw in this theory.
Okay, let's hear it.
If this law of requital is a mathematical certainty, and if our unbalanced, hoarding society is violating the laws of social physics, why hasn't the ceiling collapsed yet? I look around, and the corrupt politicians are still in power. The monopolists are still buying mega yachts. Where is the punishment?
That is the exact challenge raised in Ayat 8, which introduces the concept of the delay.
The delay.
Yes. The critics in the text actually use the absence of immediate consequences as definitive proof that the law of requital doesn't exist. They mock the messenger. They say, if you're telling the truth and our system is doomed, bring on the punishment right now. Speed it up.
It's the ultimate arrogant taunt, like, I just embezzled millions of dollars and lightning didn't strike me dead on the spot. Therefore, morality is a myth and there are no consequences.
To dismantle this arrogance, the author relies on a really powerful and, frankly, terrifying analogy, the incubation period of a severe disease.
Oh, this is a good one.
Let's say a person contracts a highly virulent, slow-acting illness, like tuberculosis. The moment they are exposed, the bacteria enters their lungs. The cause has occurred.
The math has started.
But the fever doesn't spike immediately. The person might walk around for weeks or even months feeling perfectly healthy. They go to work, they eat, they laugh, completely unaware that beneath the surface, the disease is quietly, methodically multiplying and dismantling their immune system.
And the gap between the cause contracting the bacteria and the visible effect, coughing up blood, is what the verse refers to as the ajal, the appointed term or the delay.
Exactly.
And the terrifying part is that during this incubation period, the person genuinely believes they are fine. Just because the fever hasn't hit yet doesn't mean the disease isn't active. The consequences are silently encircling them.
And this is where the concept of social physics becomes so critical. The author emphasizes that the universe does not operate on emotional vengeance. It's not an angry deity sitting on a cloud throwing lightning bolts the moment you step out of line.
Right, it's not reactionary.
It operates on natural mathematical progression. When a society violates the fundamental laws of economic balance and human dignity, the mechanism of their own destruction is instantly set in motion. The societal disease is contracted. The fact that the society hasn't collapsed yet merely means the incubation period is still running its course.
Let's trace the actual mechanics of that, because I think people struggle with this. How does a society rot from the inside out while looking completely fine on the outside?
Well, think about
a massive suspension bridge. If you stress that bridge with vehicles that far exceed its weight capacity, the steel cables don't snap the very millisecond the heavy trucks drive onto it. What happens first?
microfractures.
Microfractures. Deep inside the steel, totally invisible to the naked eye, the structural integrity is fatiguing. The structural fatigue is the incubation period.
Exactly. And the tragedy is that during this period, the society actively mocks the warnings. Because the bridge is still standing, the people driving the overweight trucks think the engineers are just alarmist fools. They mistake the silence of the incubation period for vindication.
Let's look at the actual causality in a socioeconomic system. When an elite class hoards wealth, the immediate effect isn't a riot in the streets. The immediate effect is just that the working class has slightly less buying power.
A tiny shift.
Over a decade, that compounds. Small businesses close because people aren't spending as much. Infrastructure begins to decay because tax revenues drop. Trust in civic institutions erodes. All of these are microfractures.
Yes.
The society might still look shiny on the surface. I mean, the stock market might even be up for the top 1%, but the structural integrity is gone. And once that incubation period ends, once those microfractures connect, the collapse is mathematically guaranteed.
And the text makes it incredibly clear that once that appointed term is reached, the consequences cannot be diverted. The momentum of the collapse is just too great. The incubation period is the only window you have for course correction.
Which begs a massive question, because we don't live in a vacuum. If a society is currently living inside this incubation period, heading toward a mathematically certain collapse, the environment is inherently unstable. How does the individual human mind cope with that instability?
It struggles a lot.
Because even before the total collapse, an unbalanced life is chaotic.
And that chaos is mapped out brilliantly in the transition to Ayats 9 through 11, which explore the psychology of extremes. The lectures detail how an unbalanced human mind, a mind that is severed from objective principles, cannot maintain equilibrium.
It swings back and forth.
It violently and continuously swings between two highly toxic states depending on its immediate access to resources: utter despair and blind arrogance.
Let's unpack the cycle of despair first, found in Ayat 9. What exactly happens when the resources dry up for this person?
The verse describes a scenario where the temporary resources, comforts, or mercies are withdrawn from an unbalanced person. Because this person has tied their entire sense of worth, identity, and security to their material, animal-level existence, the loss of these things completely shatters them.
Right.
They don't just feel sad, they fall into a state of utter, paralyzing despair and intense ingratitude. The Arabic terms used here are yanziz, meaning someone who has completely given up hope, and kafur, meaning someone who is actively ungrateful and denies all past good.
It's a total psychological collapse. They have no internal anchor. And I think we've all seen this, or maybe, even felt it ourselves.
Oh, definitely.
When things go wrong, the unbalanced mind develops this intense amnesia. They completely forget the decades of privilege, health, or wealth they previously enjoyed. The moment the bank account drops, they scream, "The universe is out to get me. I am ruined forever. Nothing good has ever happened to me."
Yes, the victim complex.
They immediately blame the system, the economy, or God, adopting a complete victim mentality.
And then we see the pendulum swing violently in the other direction in Ayat 10, the cycle of arrogance.
The flip side.
Let's say the economic fever breaks temporarily, or they land a massive promotion, or they suddenly inherit wealth after a period of hardship. How does the unbalanced mind react? Do they become humble? Do they recognize that resources are fluid and subject to larger economic tides?
Absolutely not.
No. They become instantly arrogant, dismissive, and boastful. The text uses the terms fari, meaning exultant and bloated with joy, and fakhur, meaning boastfully proud.
And the visual analogy the author uses here is so incredibly gritty. They compare this sudden arrogance to an animal that has suddenly become bloated with milk.
It's a great image.
It struts around the pasture, chest puffed out, completely full of itself. When the unbalanced human gets a little bit of power or wealth, they start strutting around, mistakenly believing that this temporary abundance is a direct result of their own inherent superiority.
To illustrate this, the lectures frequently reference the archetypal figure of Korun, or Korah. Korun was a figure who amassed historically massive wealth. When the community confronted him about his hoarding and reminded him that his wealth should be used to balance society, what was his response?
You didn't like that.
He famously claimed that he achieved all of his wealth purely through his own exclusive knowledge and personal genius. "I built this myself."
He's the ultimate ancient equivalent of a tech bro monopolist.
Basically, yes.
He completely ignores the societal structures, the labor of his workers, the public roads that transported his goods, and the underlying natural resources that allowed him to accumulate that wealth in the first place. He privatizes his success and socializes his failures.
Exactly.
When he succeeds, it's because he's a genius. When he fails, it's a cosmic injustice. It is a completely unscientific, emotionally volatile way to navigate reality.
It is exhausting just analyzing it, swinging wildly from "I am a helpless victim of a cruel universe" to "I am a self-made god of my own destiny." It burns out the individual and it destabilizes the community.
So what is the cure? If swinging between despair and arrogance is the pathology of an unbalanced mind living in an incubating society, how do we escape this toxic cycle? Ayat 11 gives us the solution, and it brings back the core concept we started with.
Yes, the text presents a two-part solution, Saib and Asanu Amala. Now, I really want to pause on Saber because it is almost universally translated as patience.
Right.
And in modern vernacular, patience often implies passive suffering. It implies sitting quietly in a dark room, enduring pain, and just waiting for things to get better on their own.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is exactly how I've always heard it used. Just have patience. It feels very defeatist, like you just have to take the hits. But the Parwezian lectures completely challenge that definition, don't they?
Radically so. The author argues that passive suffering is explicitly rejected by the Quranic framework. In this socioeconomic context, sabr means steadfastness.
Steadfastness.
It means remaining firmly rooted in objective principles and universal laws, regardless of the fluctuating circumstances around you. It's an active, resilient, highly engaged state of mind. When things go catastrophically wrong, people who practice sabr do not throw a tantrum.
They don't panic.
They do not fall into the yao's trap of despair. And conversely, when they achieve massive success, they do not become fakur and start boasting. Why? Because they are engaging with reality like scientists.
So they act like scientists. Let's ground this. Let's go back to our medical and engineering analogies. Imagine a structural engineer is testing a new bridge design in a simulator, and the bridge collapses under the test weight. The engineer does not drop to the floor weeping, claiming the laws of physics hate them personally.
No, they don't.
They don't fall into despair. And if the bridge holds, they don't arrogantly declare themselves the master of the universe. What do?
They look at the data, they maintain their emotional equilibrium, they analyze exactly why the formula failed or why it succeeded. They ask, did I miscalculate the tensile strength of the steel? Was the proportion of the load distribution incorrect?
Exactly. And once they analyze the data, they adjust the blueprints, recalculate the proportions, and take deliberate action to reestablish the structural balance. They do the work.
They do the work.
That is the perfect intersection of sabr and asano-amala. It is the ability to objectively analyze your environment, recognize when the social physics are out of balance, and methodically work to optimize production in fairness, regardless of whether you are currently experiencing a setback or a victory.
It fundamentally removes the victim mentality from the human experience. You are no longer a helpless leaf being blown around by the arbitrary winds of fate. You are an active participant, an engineer tasked with maintaining the delicate balance of the societal ecosystem.
It is an incredibly empowering worldview. But I have to be honest. Preaching this gritty, rational, scientific approach to life, telling people they have to do the hard mathematical work of balancing society instead of just relying on good intentions, that has to be an incredibly difficult message to sell to the masses.
It is arguably the hardest message to deliver in human history, and the author recognizes this, which perfectly sets up the conflict that emerges in the next section of the lectures, covering ayats 13 through 17.
This is a perfect teaser for where this philosophical framework goes next. Because if the law of requital is as precise as a mathematical formula, if human success requires the relentless hard work of asano-amala and the steadfast emotional control of sabr, the elite critics are not going to accept it quietly.
No, they are going to fight it.
People, generally speaking, do not want to do the hard work. We don't want a gritty, demanding reality. We want easy answers. We want a magic pill.
The critics in the text fully recognize that the system of deen requires immense sustained effort. It requires what the text calls jihad. And we must be very clear here. The lectures define this not in the modern politically corrupted sense of the word, but in its profound root sense.
An intense struggle.
Yes, an intense, prolonged intellectual and physical struggle to establish and maintain societal balance against the forces of exploitation. The elites hoarding the wealth do not want to engage in that struggle. It threatens their bottom line.
Naturally.
So they apply immense social and political pressure on the messenger to compromise. They say, we like the spiritual parts of your message. We like the nice rituals. But drop the strict laws about economic equality. Drop the demands for absolute justice. Soften the message.
And when the messenger refuses to compromise the precise prescription, because you can't compromise on the laws of physics without crashing the plane, what do the critics demand?
They demand a shortcut.
They demand an irrational shortcut. They demand the very Sirun Mubin, the very magic that they falsely accused the messenger of using earlier. The lectures highlight their exact mocking taunts. They say, if you are really a messenger with the divine system, why don't you just bring us a literal physical chest of gold from the sky? Or why doesn't an invisible angel materialize and walk beside you to prove it?
They demand the theatrical. They demand a blatant violation of the very physical laws the universe is built upon. Because think about the psychology here. If the universe operates on magic and theatrical miracles, then cause and effect isn't real.
Right.
And if cause and effect isn't real, they don't have to follow the rigorous laws of social physics. If a deity just drops chests of gold from the sky on command, then the elites don't have to restructure their exploitative economy to alleviate poverty. The demand for a miracle is, at its absolute core, a demand to be absolved of personal and societal responsibility.
I want to pause on that because that is a staggering insight. The demand for a miracle is an attempt to escape responsibility. So how does the text respond to this crowd yelling for angels and gold? Does it give them a magic trick to shut them up?
Not at all. It responds by doubling down on cold, hard reality. The text reminds them that the messenger is just a human warner. The phrase used is, "I am but a man like you," and that the universe is governed by unbending, immutable laws, not theatrical miracles.
It doesn't break its own rules.
Exactly. The system does not break its own rules just to entertain skeptics or to offer convenient shortcuts to people who are unwilling to do the hard work of restructuring their society. The only way forward, the only way to survive the incubation period, is through the reality of the system, through the optimized production of Asanu Amala.
Which brings our deep dive full circle. We started today by looking at ancient mythological imagery, an ocean and a throne held up by cosmic goats, and we watched it transform into a rigidly intellectual blueprint for resource management and political authority.
It's a profound shift.
We explored how true human success isn't about the subjective, feel-good glow of charity, but about the objective, structural engineering of optimized production and balance.
We examined how ignoring the laws of cause and effect isn't avoiding consequence. It is merely waiting blindly for a social disease's incubation period to end.
And we traced the pathology of the unbalanced mind, watching it swing violently between the total collapse of despair and the bloated delusion of arrogance, desperately searching for a magical shortcut to avoid the hard work of reality.
It truly is a profound, demanding, and relentlessly logical framework for understanding human survival. It forces a complete paradigm shift in how we view both historical texts and our modern socioeconomic responsibilities.
It absolutely does. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you step back into the real world. Think about your own life, your workplace, or the broader political and economic systems we all live within today. Where are we currently demanding an irrational miracle to fix our systemic problems?
That's the real question.
Where are we hoping for a magical chest of gold, a sudden technological fix, a charismatic politician, a stroke of luck to drop from the sky and save us, rather than doing the hard, precise, and often exhausting engineering work of Asanu Amala? Because until we stop demanding magic and start treating our societal imbalances with the precision of a doctor and the steadfastness of a scientist, we are just ignoring the microfractures in the bridge, waiting for the fever to spike.
An incredibly vital question for all of us to consider. Thank you for walking through this profound analysis with me.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the text. Until next time, keep analyzing the data, keep engineering balance, and stay curious.